You are listening to Ghosts of Asia, where silence has a voice and the dead still remember who didn't listen. They say in the city, noise is inescapable. Traffic, voices, the soft hum of machines keeping us company through the night. But what if the noise stopped? What if silence wasn't peace, but punishment? Tonight's story takes us to a quiet apartment in the heart of a crowded Asian metropolis. A place where the walls don't echo, where no sound dares linger, where even your own voice seems to dissolve into nothing. But every night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., a sound returns. Not yours, not human. A woman's cry, soft, distant, and desperate to be heard. This is not just a haunting. It is a place where sound goes to die. Welcome to the apartment that eats sound. You can hear her cry. Keep your headphones on, and whatever you do, don't speak too loud. The walls are listening, and they remember the ones who didn't.
It was the silence that struck Kenji first. Not the kind that comes with peace or rest, but the kind that hangs too heavy, like wet cloth pressed over your face, thick, suffocating, absolute. He stood in the center of his new apartment, boxes untouched, keys still dangling in the front door, and not even the faintest sound greeted him. No creak of floorboards, no hollow thud from his luggage wheels rolling across cheap laminate, no distant car horns, just nothing. Kenji clapped his hands experimentally. Nothing. He frowned, pressed his palm to his chest, spoke aloud. Hello? His lips moved, throat tensed, but he didn't hear himself. He rubbed at his ears and turned in place. Everything looked normal. White walls, narrow kitchen, low ceiling, thin windows that peered out onto the skeletal outline of Tokyo's high-rise jungle. But something was deeply wrong. The apartment was perfectly silent, too perfectly. The agent had told him it was soundproofed, professionally insulated, she had smiled, as if that were a luxury. You'll never hear your neighbors. He hadn't thought much of it then. Tokyo apartments were always noisy. Paper-thin walls, coughing strangers, muffled arguments, the shuffling of slippers at midnight. Silence sounded like a blessing. Now, it felt like a warning. Kenji slid his phone out of his pocket and played a song. The screen showed it was playing. Volume was up, headphones weren't connected. Still, nothing. He pressed the device to his ear. Still, nothing. A strange chill crept down his spine. Outside the window, life moved normally. He could see a woman walking her dog, a couple eating cup ramen on the bench below, a child pointing at something in the clouds. But he couldn't hear any of it. Even with the window open, the world remained mute. He stared at the open window in disbelief, then slammed it shut. No thump, no click, just movement. He turned back into the apartment, slowly stepping toward the kitchen. He opened and closed every cupboard, every drawer, dropped a spoon on the tile floor, knocked against the refrigerator. Still, nothing. It was like every sound was being swallowed the moment it was born. Kenji sat on the edge of the futon the landlord had included and ran his fingers through his hair. He wasn't one for dramatics. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or anything that couldn't be explained by reason. But this felt wrong. He opened his mouth again and screamed. Lips peeled back, lungs expanded, veins throbbed in his neck, and yet he heard nothing. No echo, no rasp, not even his breath. Just the mechanical thudding of his own heartbeat in his chest. He stopped, panting, and stared down at the floor. His skin prickled with the sense that something was watching, not outside, not in the hall, inside, in the walls. The apartment was clean, sterile even, no mold, no roaches, no stains, and yet it felt deeply used, lived in, as if every surface had absorbed something invisible, as if the silence itself was trying to keep a secret. Kenji opened a bottle of water, drank. The liquid was cool, familiar, but he couldn't hear the swallowing. It made his stomach twist. He fumbled in a drawer, pulled out a pack of instant noodles, and crushed them violently in his hands. Still no sound. The silence wasn't just present, it was aggressive. He turned on the faucet. Water streamed out. He couldn't hear it. Kenji touched it. It was warm, real, but completely mute. He began pacing, faster, more frantically, slammed drawers, thumped walls. Nothing. He could feel the vibrations, but not hear them, as if the apartment was swallowing each sound and hiding it somewhere behind the plaster. And then, somewhere deep behind a wall near the bedroom, he thought he heard something. A faint creak. He froze, held his breath, but it was gone, swallowed again. A fluke, maybe, an echo from upstairs. Kenji shook himself. "I'm tired," he whispered, knowing full well he wouldn't hear it. He moved toward the unpacked boxes, started setting things up, folding shirts, arranging books, laying out toiletries. It calmed him, the process, something predictable in the midst of uncertainty. He mounted his small clock on the wall, plugged in a lamp, positioned the mirror in the hallway. And then, as he passed the mirror, he stopped. His reflection was off. It was his face, yes, but for just a second, less than a breath, it hadn't moved when he did, as if the mirror was delayed, as if his reflection was remembering how to imitate him. Kenji stared, unblinked. The face stared back. He reached up to touch the mirror, and then blinked. Everything was normal again. He laughed, or thought he did. His shoulders moved, his chest lifted, but still, no sound. He turned in for the night, wrapping himself in the quiet like a too-tight blanket. The bed was firm, the sheets smelled new. The silence had weight now. It wasn't emptiness, it was presence. As he closed his eyes, the last thing he thought was, "What if I die here, and no one hears me?"
Morning came without sound. Kenji opened his eyes to a pale sheet of dawn leaking through the blinds. For a moment, he couldn't tell if he was awake or still dreaming. There was no alarm, no rustle of blankets, no sound of his own breath, just stillness, so deep it felt alive. He sat up slowly, feeling the mattress compress beneath him, but hearing nothing. Even his heartbeat seemed softer, as though the silence had reached inside him overnight. He reached for his phone again. The time? 7:14 a.m. He turned on a music app. The waveform pulsed on screen. The bars danced, but silence filled the room. Kenji dropped the phone on the bed and ran both hands over his face. "It's fine," he muttered, or thought he did. His throat worked, his lips moved, but nothing came out. He stood and went to the mirror again. The same dull expression stared back at him, dark circles under the eyes, hair tousled. He half expected the reflection to lag again, to hesitate, but it didn't, not this time. He tested the walls next. He rapped his knuckles against the plaster, hard, felt the vibration echo through bone. But there was no answering sound, no resonance.
The wall just absorbed the contact, as if it had swallowed the noise before it could live. He took a wooden spoon from the kitchen drawer, tapped it on the counter, the refrigerator, the table. Nothing. It wasn't the building that was quiet. It was his unit. He tried the hallway, opened the door, peered out. The old man next door was shuffling to his mailbox. Kenji called out, waved his arms. "Good morning!" No response. The man looked up briefly, then went back inside without a word. He tried again, louder, desperate. Nothing came out. His lips formed soundless syllables that died before reaching the air. He slammed the door shut. Still no noise. Back in his apartment, his breathing quickened. He could feel the air moving in and out of his chest, but not a whisper reached his ears. The silence pressed against him like water pressure in the deep sea, total, heavy, relentless. He turned the faucet, watched the stream of water pour out, crystal and smooth, colliding with the sink. Not a drop could be heard. Kenji began to laugh out of frustration, and even that, his laughter, felt stolen from him. He pressed his palms to the wall. Cold, perfectly flat, the paint slightly rough under his fingers. It was then that he noticed faint lines running down the wall, hairline cracks like veins. The pattern was subtle, spreading outward from the bathroom corner, curling like something organic, almost like a tree root or a scar. He followed one of the cracks down with his finger. It ended abruptly near the baseboard, where a small dark stain spread beneath the white paint. He leaned closer. It looked like water damage, but darker, thicker, as if something beneath the surface had seeped out years ago and dried before anyone noticed. Kenji's phone vibrated suddenly in his hand, making him jump. A message from his coworker. "You moved in already? The boss wants your report by Monday." He typed back, "Yeah, everything's fine," then stared at the screen. The word "fine" looked like a lie. That afternoon, he left the building and walked through the streets. The moment he stepped outside, sound returned. The relief was instant. Cars honking, people talking, the faint hiss of tires on asphalt. It all flooded back like oxygen. He almost cried from the familiarity. But the sound didn't feel the same. Everything was too sharp, too loud. The rhythm of the city grated at him. He realized he'd already started missing the silence, even though it terrified him. That apartment had already taken something from him, his sense of balance, of contrast. He stood outside a small cafe and ordered coffee. The waitress smiled, but her words blurred. He tried to answer, and his voice came out hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. She tilted her head. "Sir, are you okay?" He nodded quickly, paid, and left. Even outside, his voice was fading. He could feel it, his vocal cords tightening, refusing to obey, as though the silence had followed him out like an invisible fog. Back inside the apartment building, the world muted again. By the time he reached his door, he could no longer hear the elevator's hum or the clack of his shoes. He closed the door behind him and sighed. Silence once more wrapped him like a cocoon. The walls seemed closer now. He ran a hand along them, pressing harder. They were cold again, but pulsing faintly. It wasn't an illusion. The wall moved, ever so slightly, like something breathing just behind it. He jerked his hand back. He waited. Nothing happened. He wanted to leave, to run down the stairs and stay anywhere else, but some part of him couldn't. There was a strange comfort in the silence now, like being underwater, weightless and alone. He sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling for a long time. As night fell, the outside lights painted thin golden rectangles across his floor. Kenji switched on his lamp. The bulb flickered once, then steadied. He could see the faint outline of dust particles swirling through the still air, but no hum from the bulb, no static. He whispered again to himself, Maybe it's just bad wiring, bad insulation. It'll pass. But even thinking felt loud inside his head. He walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it in one slow swallow. Then he placed the glass down and froze. He could see the ripples moving on the water's surface, perfect concentric circles. Something had caused a vibration, a tremor, but he hadn't moved. He turned slowly, staring at the walls. The faint cracks along the plaster had grown, just a little, but enough to notice. They looked like veins now, spreading from one central point, the corner of the bedroom. Kenji walked toward it cautiously, heart pounding, even though he couldn't hear it. When he reached the corner, he crouched. Something flickered. A faint shadow, thin as a line, moved just beneath the surface of the wall. Then it stopped. Kenji stared for a long time, unsure if he'd imagined it. And then he pressed his ear against the wall. Nothing, just dead air. He exhaled shakily, started to pull away. But right before his head lifted, so faint he almost missed it, he felt something tap back, just once, from the other side. He jerked away, falling backwards. His breath came in ragged gasps, soundless in the heavy dark. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the wall. The light trembled slightly in his hand. Nothing. Smooth white paint. Cracks. Nothing else. But when the flashlight beam drifted up toward the ceiling, he saw it. Faint handprints smudged along the plaster. Small, ghostly palms pressed outward, as if someone had once tried to push their way through the silence. Kenji backed up slowly, the phone trembling in his grip. He whispered again, this time just with his lips, "Who's there?" And the silence seemed to lean closer, and from somewhere deep inside the wall, a faint vibration answered, like a voice that had forgotten how to speak. That night, the silence was heavier than usual. It pressed against Kenji's chest as he lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the faint reflection of the window's streetlight bleeding through the curtains. He hadn't slept much since the tapping. His mind repeated the moment over and over. That small vibration, the soft contact from behind the wall. It had felt intentional, like a knock meant for him. He wanted to convince himself it was pipes, or the wind, or maybe just his pulse echoing through the plaster. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The silence in this place was too absolute. It killed everything that wasn't her. He set his phone beside him, flashlight off, voice recorder open. If there really was something in the wall, he would catch it this time. He closed his eyes, letting the stillness swallow him whole. Seconds crawled. Minutes. The red digits on his digital clock glowed dimly in the dark. 2:56 a.m. He waited. The air grew colder. He could feel it against his exposed skin, the way it slid across his neck like invisible fingertips. The silence deepened further, if that was even possible, until even his heartbeat seemed to dissolve. And then, at 3:13 a.m., he heard it. Faint. Distant. A woman's sobbing. It came from everywhere at once, through the walls, through the air, through the bones of the apartment. The sound was fragile, trembling as though it were afraid of being heard. It quivered on the edge of existence, one breath away from disappearing. Kenji sat up slowly. The sound recorder on his phone flickered. The waveform trembled. It was picking something up, but when he turned up the volume, the crying didn't grow louder. It stayed faint, always just far enough away. He whispered, "Who are you?" The question didn't echo. His voice still didn't exist. But the crying paused, and for the briefest moment, something listened. He could feel it turn toward him, not with eyes, but with attention, a weight in the air shifting in his direction. The sobbing resumed, softer this time, quieter, like a whisper beneath the whisper of the night. Kenji moved off the bed, bare feet on the cold floor, following the sound. It led him to the bathroom door, slightly ajar. The crying seemed to pulse from inside. He pushed it open. The bathroom mirror reflected his trembling hand holding the phone light. The sink was dry, the drain dark, the tiles perfectly still. But when he leaned over the basin, he felt a breeze rise from the drain, a slow exhale, impossibly cold. He crouched closer. The sobbing came from below. "Hello?" he whispered again, though he knew she wouldn't hear him. For a few seconds, there was no response. Then, from deep within the pipes, the sound changed. The sobbing turned to gasping, then a whisper. "Can you hear me?" Kenji froze. Every muscle in his body tensed. He looked down at the drain wide-eyed. "Yes," he mouthed. "Yes, I can." But the voice didn't return. Only the sobbing remained, fainter, fading, and then silence again. He stayed there for a long time, crouched beside the sink, staring into the dark mouth of the drain. The phone's light flickered once, then steadied. When he looked up, the mirror showed him his own face, pale, hollow, expressionless. And behind his reflection, just for a second, he thought he saw someone standing in the doorway, a woman, head bowed, long hair draped over her shoulders. When he turned around, no one was there. The next morning, Kenji checked his phone. The recording from the night before was still there. He hit play. Nothing. Complete silence. No waveform, no crying, just digital emptiness. He rewound, played again, still nothing. He cursed silently, pacing the floor, his hands shaking. Maybe the microphone had failed. Maybe the sound couldn't survive in this apartment the way other sounds couldn't. Maybe the crying was never real, but it felt real. He played the file one last time. This time, something faint, like static, a glitch like breathing underwater, and then a single word. "Listen." Then silence. That day at work, Kenji couldn't focus. The noise of the office felt foreign, intrusive, unreal. Every click of the keyboard, every cough, every voice grated against him. He longed for silence again, even if it was cursed. He stayed late, pretending to work, just so he wouldn't have to go back. But by the time he finally returned, night had already swallowed the city. The apartment stood dark and still, waiting. He hesitated at the door. The air inside felt colder. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. No sound. He stood there for a while, breathing heavily, before pulling out his phone. He opened the voice recorder again. This time, he set an alarm for 3:10 a.m. and left the phone on the bedside table. If she cried again, he would be ready. When the alarm vibrated against the wood, it startled him awake. 3:10 a.m. He turned toward the phone and hit record. The silence was total again. He waited, eyes wide, staring into the dim light spilling through the curtains. Then, right on time, 3:13 a.m., the sobbing began. Fainter than before, almost delicate, like something precious breaking apart behind the walls. Kenji whispered, "Where are you?" He didn't hear his own voice, but somehow the crying changed. It grew closer. He could feel it now, not through his ears, but through the vibration in the air. It was like standing next to a heartbeat, faint and fragile. And then the whisper came again, clearer this time. "I'm still here." Kenji's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he mouthed again. "Forgotten. Please hear me." He reached for the wall beside the bed and pressed his hand against it. The surface was cold and trembling slightly under his touch. The crying swelled for a heartbeat, raw, full of despair. Then it stopped altogether. The silence that followed was unbearable. Kenji stayed awake for hours, afraid to move, afraid that if he blinked, she'd appear behind him again. By dawn, exhaustion finally dragged him into shallow sleep. When he woke, his phone screen was black, the battery dead. He plugged it in, and when it powered back up, the voice recording was still there. He played it. Once again, it was empty. But near the very end, buried under static, a faint, irregular thud. It took him a moment to realize what it was. Someone knocking. 3 slow taps, then one sharp cry, cut off midway. He stared at the screen, pulse hammering, skin cold. And in the corner of the room, the wall cracked again, a tiny fracture spidering outward, as if the plaster itself had flinched. Kenji closed his eyes. He didn't know if he was losing his mind or if something was truly trapped here. But one thought whispered in his head, refusing to leave. If she cries to be heard, what happens if someone finally listens?
The next evening, Kenji didn't turn on the lights. He moved through the apartment in the dim gray of dusk, letting shadows stretch long across the floor. The silence followed him like a second skin, constant, breathing, and always one step behind. By now, he no longer tried to make sound. He had stopped clapping, talking, even whispering. There was no point. The apartment had devoured it all. But what it hadn't silenced was her. The woman who cried at 3:13. He didn't know what she was, ghost, memory, echo, only that she was real. Real in the way the wall shivered under his hand. Real in the way her voice rose from the floorboards and from the drains. Kenji stood in the bathroom doorway, eyes fixed on the sink basin. The drain stared back, dark, round, and deeper than it should have been, like an open mouth at the bottom of the porcelain bowl, waiting to speak again. He crouched beside it, just as he had the night before. This time, he brought an old stethoscope he'd ordered online that morning. One of those cheap training models for med students. It arrived in a plain box, no instructions, just plastic tubing and cold metal. He placed the stethoscope into his ears, then lowered the disc into the drain. At first, nothing. Just the dull, blank hum of silence. But then, faint, something stirred. A sigh. Not the wind, not plumbing. It was wet, like breath sliding over something damp and hollow. He pressed the disc deeper. Now the whisper returned. It was muddled, distant, as though it had to travel through decades of forgotten pipes just to reach him. Still here. Cold. He won't let me go. Kenji's skin prickled. Who? He mouthed. Silence. Then the voice returned, strained,
He watches the drain. Kenji jerked the stethoscope back, heart pounding. He stared down into the metal spiral. It looked different now, wider somehow, or maybe deeper. A slow drop of water clung to the rim. It hadn't been there earlier. He turned on the faucet. Nothing came out, but the drop swelled and fell into the drain. It made no sound. Kenji stood slowly, breathing shallowly. The stethoscope slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. But again, not a single sound. He looked at the mirror. His reflection watched him without blinking. There was something about his own face he didn't recognize anymore. His lips were pale, his eyes too wide, too tired. He touched the mirror. It was warm. Later that night, Kenji sat in the center of the apartment with the floor lamp off. Just one candle flickered beside him on the table, the only light he trusted now. He set his phone beside it, voice recorder on again, though he no longer expected it to work. He whispered to the air, "I know you're here." Nothing. "I heard you." Stillness. Then he said it not out loud, just in his mind, letting the thought drift like smoke. "What do you want?" The apartment breathed. Not literally, but Kenji could feel the pressure shift, the air grow tight, dense. His ears popped. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 slow raps from the bathroom. Not violent, not urgent, almost polite. Kenji rose, legs stiff, and walked across the room. Each step felt too loud in his body and too silent in the world. He opened the bathroom door. The light was already on, but the room looked different. The shadows were wrong. The walls seemed to lean inward slightly, like they were listening. He stepped inside. There on the edge of the bathtub lay a photograph. It hadn't been there before. Kenji bent down slowly and picked it up. It was old, yellowed at the corners, water damaged, smudged by fingerprints long faded. It showed a woman, early 20s, black hair, blunt bangs, a delicate smile like she didn't quite belong in the frame. She stood in front of this very apartment door, number 803. On the back, in faded pen, was a name. Aiko Yamada, room 803, last tenant. His chest tightened. He clutched the photo and backed away from the tub. But something was written below her name, so faint he hadn't noticed it at first. He never let her leave. He stared at the words. The ink had bled, but the message was clear. He never let her leave. He didn't know who he was. The landlord? Another tenant? Something else? But in his gut, he knew the drain, the crying, the silence, none of it was accidental. This wasn't a haunted apartment. It was a prison. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the crying began again. This time, Kenji was ready. He knelt before the sink, candle in hand, and leaned close to the drain. He whispered slowly, carefully, "Aiko, I know your name." The sobbing paused. "Someone remembers me." Kenji nodded, tears stinging his eyes. "I'm here," he mouthed. The air shifted, the water in the toilet bowl trembled, even the candlelight bent slightly toward the drain. Aiko's voice came again, not sobbing this time, just whispering. "Don't trust the silence." "What does that mean?" Kenji mouthed. "It listens. It learns you. And once it knows your sound, it can wear you." He backed away. "And once it knows your sound, it can wear you." The candle flickered violently. The mirror cracked with a soft pop. And then, total stillness. No more crying, no voice, just the dead silence returning deeper than before. Kenji stood alone in the flickering dark, clutching the photograph. The silence had heard them speak, and now it knew him. The next morning, Kenji sat by the window, clutching the old photograph in trembling hands. The city outside was loud again. Car horns, chatter, the mechanical hum of normal life. But from behind his sealed windows, he could only see it, not hear it. The silence inside the apartment was still absolute, still heavy, still wrong. He stared at the name written in faded ink, Aiko Yamada, the woman who cried through the walls. He whispered her name once, though even his own whisper was stolen by the air. It felt strange, forming words that would never exist in sound. He needed to know who she was. Maybe if he understood her story, he could end this. Kenji left the apartment for the first time in days. The moment he stepped into the corridor, sound returned faintly. The low hum of the elevator, the muffled clang of distant pipes. It was weak, but it existed, like the silence was confined strictly to his unit. As he walked toward the building's exit, he passed apartment 804, directly across from his. Its door was perfectly clean. No scuffs, no doormat, no nameplate, just sterile beige paint. For a moment he hesitated there, staring. He thought he heard something faint, a dull vibration like someone breathing behind the door. But when he leaned closer, it stopped. He moved on. Outside, the world was too alive. Every sound hit him like a knife. Birds, engines, laughter. It was overwhelming after so many days of sensory starvation. He kept his head down and made his way to the small police kiosk near the station. The officer behind the glass looked bored, half asleep. Kenji slid the photograph across the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice raspy and low. "Do you know this woman? She used to live at 803 in the Azuma Apartments." The officer frowned. Azuma Apartments? That old building on the corner of Shinagawa Street? Kenji nodded. The officer leaned closer to the photograph, squinting. Name. Aiko Yamada. The officer sighed. That's not an uncommon name. Could be anyone. Kenji hesitated. She disappeared, I think. That caught his attention. Disappeared. Kenji nodded again. There's something strange about that building. No one hears anything in that apartment, not even sound. The officer gave a dry laugh. You mean soundproofing? No, Kenji said quietly, shaking his head. Not soundproofing. Erased. The man's smile faded a little. He flipped through his computer screen, typing lazily. Let's see. Aiko Yamada, Azuma Apartments, room 803. He scrolled, then stopped. His face changed. He glanced at Kenji briefly, then at the monitor again. "Is something wrong?" Kenji asked. The officer's eyes lingered on the screen before he said softly, "There was an Aiko Yamada, 27 years old, reported missing 3 years ago." Kenji's blood ran cold. What happened to her? "Never found," the officer said. "Neighbors reported hearing, well, nothing actually. No disturbance. She just stopped showing up to work. Rent kept getting paid for months after that, automatic transfer. But eventually, when the payments stopped, the landlord opened the unit." "And?" Kenji leaned forward. "Nothing inside," the officer said. "Empty. Not even furniture. Just one thing written on the bathroom mirror." He paused. The words, "Can you hear me?" Kenji's throat tightened. He could feel his pulse pounding behind his ears. "Do you know who owned the building?" he asked. The officer shook his head. "Old records. Ownership changed hands multiple times. The current landlord doesn't live in Japan anymore. Overseas investment company." Kenji swallowed hard. "So there's no one left who knows what happened?" The officer gave him a long look. "You said you live there now?" "Yes. I'd move out if I were you," the man said quietly. "Some buildings, they're built wrong, like they remember pain." Back at the apartment, Kenji hesitated at the door before unlocking it. He whispered to the empty hall, "I found you, Aiko." No answer. He stepped inside. The air pressed against him immediately, thick, still, devouring hall sound once more. He walked straight to the bathroom and stared into the drain. The photograph of Aiko lay on the counter, its edges curling. He set it upright against the mirror, like a small shrine. Then slowly, he wrote with his fingertip across the fogged surface of the mirror the same words she had written 3 years ago. "Can you hear me?" He waited. For a moment, nothing. Then, the air shifted. The letters on the mirror began to fade, as if invisible fingers were tracing them from the other side. Kenji's breath caught. He stepped back. The condensation on the glass trembled, then rearranged, forming new words. "Now I can." The lights flickered once. Then the crying began. Not at 3:13 this time, but right there in broad daylight. Soft at first, muffled, coming from inside the bathroom walls. He pressed his palm against the tile. The vibration was unmistakable, the same fragile rhythm of weeping. He whispered into the silence, "I'm listening." The crying paused. Then the faint sound of something scratching from inside the wall. He froze. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging down wood. And then he saw it. A thin crack opened in the tile near the mirror, spreading downward in a slow crawl. Dust fell in silence. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Through the crack, he thought he saw something move, pale and wet, sliding just beneath the surface, a finger pressing outward. He turned off the light. Everything went black. And yet, in the dark, he could still see the faint outline of her shape against the wall, her head bowed, long hair clinging to the plaster like it was trying to grow through it. Her voice came faint and broken. "Thank you for hearing me." Kenji whispered, What happened to you? The air went cold. He made me quiet. Who? The one who built this silence. Her form faded back into the wall, piece by piece, like she was being reabsorbed by the darkness. Kenji stood there long after she vanished, his pulse thundering in the quiet. He didn't know who he was, but whom or whatever had made this silence, it was still here, watching, listening. That night, Kenji didn't sleep. He couldn't. Not after what he'd seen. Not after watching her face form in the wall like condensation, fragile, fading, impossibly human. He sat in the living room, wrapped in a thin blanket, candlelight flickering beside him. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, his world remained muted, hollow, untouched by time. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It had shape. It had intent. Kenji picked up his phone. The recording from earlier was still there. He hit play. Static. Then, just for a heartbeat, crying. Then, something else. A voice, distant, warping through electronic air. "You hear me?" Kenji's breath caught. It wasn't the same sobbing as before. This was clearer, sharper, no longer reaching out like a plea, but answering like a warning. He paused the file, rewound, played again. "You hear me?" A statement, not a question. He stared at the waveform on the screen. For days now, he had failed to capture anything real, but this was different. She was talking to him. The apartment had let it through. But why? Kenji whispered into the silence, "I hear you." Nothing replied. Not yet. At 3:13 a.m., the crying returned, but it was closer. No longer filtered through walls, no longer faint. It sounded like it was inside the room. Kenji sat upright in bed, heart pounding, ears straining. The crying drifted in slow waves, sometimes behind him, sometimes above, sometimes beneath the floorboards. He whispered, "Where are you?" And this time, the cry answered back. It shifted in tone, rising into something like a moan, a soft exhale laced with pain. Then came the voice, brittle and raw. "I'm in the quiet." Kenji stood and turned slowly. The apartment looked the same, dim, spare, frozen, but the energy had changed. The silence now felt like a surface stretched over something restless. He walked into the bathroom, clutching the candle. The mirror was cracked. The photograph of Aiko had curled into itself, the ink bleeding outward. Kenji leaned down, placed his palm against the floor tile. The cold went straight into his bones. But beneath it, he felt something move, a rhythm. Not sound, but intention, like a heartbeat crawling through the ceramic. He whispered, "Are you trapped?" A pause. Then the voice again. Not from the drain, not from the mirror, but from the very walls. "He buried my sound, so no one could hear me die." Kenji's throat tightened. "He?" he mouthed. "Who is he?" The walls pulsed once, the air shifted, and then came the answer. Not spoken, not even whispered. It came as a thought, pressed into his mind like a stain, a memory that didn't belong to him. A woman screaming, a man's shadow towering over her, her mouth wide open, but no sound. Then silence, forever. Kenji stumbled backward, gasping, tears in his eyes. His legs gave out and he sat hard on the cold bathroom floor. He now understood. Whoever he was, he hadn't killed her with a knife. He had killed her with silence, had made sure no one could hear her beg, no one could hear her scream. And this apartment, this place, had helped. He looked around, chest rising and falling. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered to the room. The silence answered. A low groan creaked through the floor. The air shimmered as if from heat, though the room remained cold. Dust fell from the ceiling in a slow, graceful drift. And then he heard it. A breath, right behind him. He turned, but there was no one. Only the mirror, only his reflection. But the face wasn't his. It was her. Aiko. Pale, wet eyes, bloodied lips, her face looking out from inside the glass, not reflected, trapped behind it. And her mouth moved. "Listen to me." Kenji stepped closer, hand trembling. She said it again. "Listen to me." He nodded. "I am." Then she spoke, not in fragments, not in whispers, but in a voice that filled his mind like thunder underwater. "He still lives in the silence. He wears the sound of others. And when no one hears you, you become part of him." Kenji backed out of the bathroom, nearly falling. The apartment felt alive now, not haunted, not cursed, conscious. He grabbed his jacket and opened the front door to flee, but stopped. Apartment 804's door was open. Just a crack. He stared at it. The hallway was empty. Cold fluorescent light buzzed from the ceiling, the only sound beyond his door. He had never seen 804 open before. Kenji stepped forward. The door creaked open silently at his touch. Inside, darkness. No furniture, no light. Just bare walls and a faint smell of damp plaster. And on the far wall, something written in dark paint, jagged and desperate. "He speaks in echoes. He feeds on the quiet." Kenji turned and ran back into his apartment, slamming the door shut. But the silence didn't let him go. The walls pulsed. The floor creaked. And then, faintly, the crying began again. This time, it was not Aiko. It was him. Kenji pressed his hands to his face. He couldn't hear himself cry. He had begun to fade.
The next morning, Kenji avoided the mirror. He brushed his teeth without looking up. He stepped over the bathroom threshold like it might bite him. He kept the lights low, the curtains shut, and his mind quiet, as if silence had become not just a condition, but a rule. The apartment felt tighter today, like the walls had inched closer overnight. His voice, though, was barely present. When he tried to hum, nothing happened. No throat vibration, no tickle in his chest. He could feel the shape of sound trying to rise, but something inside refused to let it escape. The silence wasn't just swallowing sound now. It was learning him, and it was replacing things. That thought haunted him as he stared at the door across the hall. Apartment
8:04. Its door remained closed now. No signs of life. No noise, no footsteps, no flickering lights under the gap. Kenji hadn't seen anyone go in or out in the 2 weeks he lived here, not once. And yet, the message written on its wall had burned itself into his memory. He speaks in echoes. He feeds on the quiet. Kenji needed to know what was inside. That afternoon, he returned to the hallway and stood in front of 8:04. He reached out slowly and knocked once. No sound. Of course. But the wood beneath his knuckles felt wrong. Soft, like it wasn't wood at all, but stretched skin. The surface rippled ever so slightly under his touch. He stepped back, heart racing. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered, once, then again, and the door to 8:04 creaked open. Kenji didn't touch it. It opened on its own. No wind, no pressure, just an invitation. Inside, the darkness waited. He stepped forward. The interior of 8:04 was impossible. It was the same layout as his own apartment, same narrow hallway, same bedroom off to the right. But everything was off. The walls weren't painted, they were pulsing, breathing with each step he took. The floor beneath him wasn't wood or tile, it was something wet. And there were no windows, no lights, just blackness that refused to be pierced. In the center of the main room there was a table, a single chair, and on the table an old cassette tape recorder. No cords, no batteries, just sitting there like it had been waiting. Kenji approached slowly. He reached out, pressed play. Silence. Then a voice. "Don't forget your name." Kenji stepped back. The voice was his own voice, distorted, slowed like it had been dragged through something thick. Then came the second voice, hers, Aiko. "You'll become just another room." He stared at the tape recorder, fingers shaking. He turned to leave, but the hallway behind him had changed. It no longer led to the building corridor. Instead, it looped, a perfect circle, a hallway that never ended. He walked for what felt like minutes, turned corners, past walls that looked the same, doorways that led nowhere. The silence deepened. And then, from behind him, footsteps. He froze. Not heavy, not fast, just deliberate. One step, then another, then a pause. He turned. No one. But the air was thick now, too thick to breathe. He pressed his hand to his chest. His lungs wouldn't expand. He whispered, "Let me go." No answer. Then, from the wall beside him, a mouth opened. Not a hole, a mouth. Lips parted in the plaster. No eyes, no face, just a woman's mouth, pressed through the surface like clay. And from that mouth came the voice. "He lives in the quiet you ignore." Kenji screamed, or tried to. No sound came out, only the sensation of screaming, hollow and cold. When he came to, he was lying on the floor outside 8:04. His key was in his hand. His own door was behind him, ajar. Morning light spilled from the stairwell window, pale and indifferent. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious. His phone was missing. His watch was frozen at 3:13 a.m. He crawled back into 8:03, dragging himself like a corpse. The moment he crossed the threshold, he he heard something he hadn't in weeks. His own breath. Shaky, sharp, real. The apartment had let him go, but it had changed him. He looked at his reflection in the microwave door. His lips moved, and for the first time, the voice that came out was not his. "Don't forget your name." Kenji stepped back. He was no longer sure what was being repeated, or who was doing the repeating. That night, at 3:13 a.m., he sat in the center of his apartment. The crying came again, but now it came from both sides of the wall. Aiko weeping on one end, and something else mimicking her on the other. Not a voice, a shadow of one, a hollow replica. Something trying to learn what it meant to suffer. Kenji covered his ears, but the sound came from inside his bones, inside his silence. Kenji no longer trusted digital things. His phone was gone, either stolen by 804 or swallowed by whatever force ruled its black hallways. His laptop wouldn't start. Its fan whirred, the screen blinked, and died. And the smart speaker he hadn't used once in the apartment suddenly turned on by itself the night before. All it played was static. Then a voice, his own, repeating a single phrase. "You hear me. You hear me. You hear me." So Kenji stopped using modern things. Instead, he visited a second-hand electronics store in a part of the city that still smelled like VHS tape glue and mothballs. He asked the old woman behind the counter if she had a cassette tape recorder. She pulled out a dusty box from under the register, wrapped in yellowing newspaper. "No charge," she said. "Just return it when you're done." He never asked why she said it like that. Back in the apartment, Kenji sat cross-legged in the dark. The silence had begun to shift lately. It no longer felt like emptiness. Now it trembled, like it was holding its breath. He slid a blank cassette into the recorder, hit the red record button, and then nothing. Not even a hum. He sat still for 30 minutes. No questions, no whispers. Just the low flicker of candlelight on cracked plaster. But at 3:13 a.m., the tape clicked on its own. Kenji hadn't touched it. He leaned in, eyes wide, breath shallow. The silence in the room grew thick, syrupy, suffocating. And then the tape started playing, even though it had just been recording. The voice that came out was not his. It was hers, Aiko. But not the crying, not this time. She was whispering, fast, panicked, like she only had seconds to speak. "He's underneath, where the pipes don't end. He eats what's forgotten. The silence keeps him full. You're being erased, bit by bit." Kenji stared at the recorder. He could hear her. The analog captured what nothing digital could. Not just the sound, but the intention behind it, the memory. Then came a second voice, low, male, crawling like tar. "Hears you now." The tape whined, slowed, warped. "Knows your voice now." Kenji ripped the cassette out. The tape was warm. Too warm. He pressed it to the floor, and the floor vibrated. Not like machinery, not like plumbing, like a throat clearing. He backed away. Later that night, Kenji played the tape again with headphones. He sat in the bathroom, feet crossed under him, recorder in hand. He closed his eyes. The whispers returned, only this time not words, sounds. Memories. A woman humming, a kettle boiling, footsteps on tile, A soft knock on a bedroom door. The sigh of someone alone too long. It was like Aiko had etched her life into the silence, left it there, buried under drywall, preserved in the walls that swallowed her. Kenji began to cry, but no tears came. He reached for his reflection in the mirror, but it didn't move. His reflection just stared, and then slowly smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. The next morning, Kenji's voice was almost entirely gone. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound came out wrong, warped, glitchy, like a recording played backward. Even in his own head, his thoughts echoed strangely. He scribbled a message on the wall above the sink. "How do I stop it?" And below it, condensation formed. A reply. "You can't, but you can trade." Kenji stepped back. Trade? Trade what? And then, behind him, the tape recorder clicked again. Not play, record. That night, he tried something desperate. He brought the recorder to 804. He didn't go inside, just placed it at the foot of the door, hit record, and whispered, "Take this instead. Take my voice. Let her go." He left it there, walked back into his apartment, and waited. At 3:13 a.m., the recorder clicked. Kenji opened the door. The cassette was gone. In its place, a small box. He brought it inside, fingers trembling. Inside the box was a cassette, a different one, older, labeled in faded ink. Room 803, original recording. He inserted it, pressed play. The first sound that came through wasn't crying. It was Aiko's laugh. Real, soft, light. Then a knock on a wall. Then a man's voice. "Stop recording everything," the man said. Aiko laughed again. "Why? I like keeping the silence full." Then static, shouting, then nothing. And then the crying began. Soft, broken. The same sound Kenji had heard for days. He listened until the tape ran out. Then he whispered, "She kept her silence full." That's what kept her real. But he hadn't. He had let the silence feed on him. Kenji sat in the dark, voice gone, eyes sunken, holding the recorder in his lap. At 3:13 a.m., he no longer waited for the crying, because now it came from his walls, and sometimes it answered in his own voice. Kenji hadn't left the apartment in days. The silence had seeped into him. His voice was now a memory, not lost, but stolen. When he opened his mouth, the words stayed inside. Even his thoughts were beginning to feel muffled. Still, he refused to surrender. Some part of him believed there was a pattern to it all, a structure beneath the silence, a design. So he went searching, not inside the apartment this time, but in the bones beneath it, the building itself. He took the subway to the city archives, an old civic building whose walls were lined with mildew and forgotten permits, a place that still smelled like carbon paper and inked thumbprints. He asked the clerk about Azuma Apartments. The woman behind the desk didn't flinch. She searched quietly, typed, frowned, then said, "That one? Built in 1973. Original name was Shinkai Sanatorium." Kenji's blood ran cold. "Sanatorium?" he mouthed, though nothing left his lips. The woman tapped the screen. "Used to house patients with behavioral issues. High walls, soundproof rooms, private cells. After the law changed in '79, it was shut down, converted into housing by a real estate holding company in the mid-'80s. She printed a file. The folder was thick, brittle at the edges. She handed it over, already turning back to her coffee. Kenji sat in the archive room and began to read. Floor plans, blueprints, psychiatric logs. He flipped page after page, the story unfolding like rot beneath wallpaper. Each unit had originally been a containment chamber. Some had padded walls, others had reinforced glass in place of windows. The purpose was always the same: silence. To keep the city from hearing what went on inside, and to keep whatever was inside from finding its voice. One document stood out, stained, barely legible. Unit 803, subject resisted isolation. Auditory hallucinations persisted post-sealing. Prescribed silence regimen. Room modified for permanent sensory suppression. Permanent sensory suppression. Kenji's fingers trembled. They hadn't just soundproofed the room, they had erased it. He found photographs, black and white, of the original hallway. Doorways labeled with metal numbers, the same as now. Each with reinforced double doors, no windows, just narrow slots for food trays and observation holes. In one photo, a figure stood inside Unit 803, barely visible through the slit, a girl with dark hair, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming, but no sound. Kenji stared at it for a long time. Then he flipped to the back of the folder where incident reports were kept. He found one labeled Final Entry, 1980. Patient in 803 disappeared. Room sealed after containment breach. No traces found. Silence remains. 3 lines. No body, no explanation, just silence. Kenji stumbled out of the archives and rode home in numb quiet. He kept one photocopy tucked in his pocket, the floor plan showing something he hadn't noticed before. Between units 803 and 804, a crawl space, unmarked, hidden behind the shared bathroom wall. He had to see it for himself. Back in the apartment, the quiet had changed. The silence was angry. It pressed against his temples like pressure in an airplane cabin, as if it knew what he had learned, as if the silence was no longer tolerating his curiosity. He moved quickly, dragged a chair into the bathroom, stood on it, tapped the tiles behind the mirror. Hollow. He pried one loose with a kitchen knife. Behind it, drywall. He punched through. Dust fell like ash. A hole, big enough for a body to pass through. Behind the wall, darkness. He climbed in. The space was tight, barely wider than his shoulders. The air was thick with mold and rust. Pipes ran overhead, dripping slowly into the silence. The crawl space bent to the left, between the apartments, between him and 804. And there, in the center, was a chair, just sitting in the dark, facing nothing. Its legs were bolted to the floor. Straps dangled from its arms. Stains patterned the seat, and on the wall behind it, etched into the concrete, "If you can hear this, you're next." Kenji backed out, crawled quickly, gasping, gagging on the thick air. When he re-entered his apartment, the room was dark. The lights no longer worked. The candle had gone out. But the mirror was fogged, and in the fog, a new message appeared. "You found where I ended." Then, slowly, the condensation faded, and in its place, his reflection stared back. Only, it wasn't him anymore. It was him wearing someone else's smile. At 3:13 a.m., the crying returned, this time louder, and layered beneath it a second voice, deeper, hungrier. You opened the wall, and now I have room. Kenji screamed, but not a sound escaped, not even in his own mind. Kenji no longer remembered what his voice used to sound like. He tried mouthing old phrases in the mirror, childhood lullabies, his mother's name, a joke he once told on the train, but they meant nothing now, just empty movements, silent theater. The silence inside apartment 803 was no longer just a condition. It was a language, and it had learned him. Every breath he took now came with the feeling that something else was breathing with him, copying him, a second rhythm under his ribs, a ghost pulse. Still, he clung to one truth. Aiko had left something behind. He had heard it, on the tape, in the mirror, in the air itself. He just needed to find her last message. He returned to the crawl space the next morning, flashlight in hand, mouth stitched tight in anxious silence. This time he went further, past the chair, past the rusted pipes, until the walls narrowed so tightly he had to flatten his chest to keep moving. Then he found it. A small box, wedged into a hollow beneath a crumbling beam, wrapped in tape, sealed with wax. Her initials etched faintly on the lid. A.Y. Hands shaking, he opened it. Inside, a cassette labeled in delicate handwriting. "My last night. Please don't forget me." Kenji closed his eyes, pressed the cape to his forehead. He carried it back to the apartment like it was made of glass. That night, the silence was not still. It rumbled, not like thunder, but like breath rolling over stone, a slow inhalation that never ended. Kenji lit his candle, sat cross-legged on the floor, inserted the tape into the recorder. Pressed play. At first, just static. Then Aiko's voice, whispering, tired, fragile. "If you're listening, that means I failed. He's still here. I tried to stop him. I tried to stay loud, but this place eats everything. Your voice, your memory, your soul. I don't know his name. He was never a person, just something that was born in silence. He doesn't want to kill you. He wants to keep you inside." A pause, then something even softer. "I can feel him wearing me. Sometimes I hear myself crying from inside the walls, but I'm not the one crying anymore." Kenji pressed his fingers to his lips. Her words clung to the air like dust. "If you've heard me, if you know I was real, please don't let this be my last sound. Don't let me end here. Scream for me, even if no one hears you. Even if it means he comes for you next." Then, silence. Then, the sound of crying, softer than ever. And then the tape stopped. Click. Kenji sat motionless for a long time. Her last request repeated in his head, "Scream for me." So he stood, walked into the center of the apartment, opened his mouth, and let loose the loudest scream he could muster. His throat stretched, his chest heaved, his eyes watered, but no sound came out. And still, he kept screaming, and screaming, and screaming. until something heard. The walls began to tremble. The mirror shattered in a single breath. From the corners of the room, cracks bloomed, black veins crawling across the ceiling. And then, from inside the drain, a hand emerged. Small, pale, broken at the wrist. It reached upward, not grasping, but pleading. Kenji dropped to his knees. He reached back, fingers touched, cold. And then another voice joined hers, his own, from inside the wall. "Help me," it said. "Let me out." But he was still kneeling on the floor, still here, and yet not. He looked into the cracked tile and saw his reflection staring back from behind it. Not in the glass, inside. He staggered back, mouth open in disbelief. The hand vanished, the crack sealed. The apartment grew quiet again. Not silent, but waiting. He played the tape one last time, just to hear her voice, just to prove someone had once lived here, just to remind himself that he hadn't disappeared. Yet.
It was 3:13 a.m., and for the first time in 17 nights, the apartment was silent. Not just quiet, not just soundless, but empty. No sobs, no gasps behind the walls, no scratching, no voice at all. And that terrified Kenji more than anything. He sat upright in bed, candles still burning low on the nightstand. He hadn't fallen asleep. He didn't trust the dark anymore. He barely trusted the air. He watched the seconds tick by on his old analog wristwatch. 3:13, 3:14, 3:15. No weeping, no whisper. Just the slow, creeping dread that something had changed, and that he had missed the moment it happened. He stepped into the bathroom, half expecting to find a message on the mirror or a wet handprint on the wall. Nothing. The tiles were dry, the mirror cracked but clear, the drain silent. He leaned in, placed his ear to the sink's mouth. No breath, no cry, not even a vibration. He called her name silently, Aiko, letting the shape of it stretch through his mind. But even in thought, there was no echo. Kenji sat at the table, staring at the old cassette recorder. The final tape still rested inside. He had listened to it over and over, hoping to catch something new. This time, when he pressed play, it was blank. Not static, not silence. Blank. Like it had been wiped clean. Like her voice had never been there at all. He fast-forwarded, rewound, pressed every button. The tape inside turned, but nothing came out. Kenji's hands trembled. He opened the compartment. The cassette ribbon was smooth, untangled, unbroken, but too perfect, like a surface never used. A void where her memory had once been. He whispered to himself, "She's gone." And this time, even the silence didn't answer. He left the apartment just after sunrise, walking to the corner convenience store. The street was damp with morning fog. People moved past him, alive and unaware. He tried to speak to the clerk, to ask a question, but the words didn't come.
Not choked, not blocked, absent. He could move his lips, form sentences, but the air refused to carry them. He was a man without sound now, not just in his home, but everywhere. Back inside 803, he stood by the window. Birds flitted across the rooftop nearby, but he couldn't hear their wings. Cars passed, but no engines followed. A child below tripped and cried, but the sound didn't reach him. The silence had spread. It traveled with him now, a shadow stitched to his lungs. The apartment had followed him outside and then followed him back in. That night, he tried one final time to find her. He rewound every tape, sat beside every wall, pressed his hands and ear and mouth to every surface. Nothing. The crawl space was still there, but the chair was gone. The message on the wall, "If you can hear this, you're next," had faded to a gray smear like water damage. Even the echoes were vanishing. And that's when the reflection stopped following him. It was subtle at first, a half-second delay, a blink that didn't sink, a smile that lasted just a breath too long. Kenji avoided mirrors now. He kept his eyes low, drew the curtains, lit fewer candles, because the thing in the mirror no longer looked sad. It looked patient. On the third night without her crying, Kenji awoke in total darkness. No light, no sound, no memory of ever falling asleep. He sat upright, checked his watch. 3:13. He waited. And then, for the briefest second, a new voice whispered, not hers, not his, deeper, older, something from beneath all the crying, beneath the silence, beneath the building itself. And it said, "She's made room." Then silence returned, and this time it felt final. Kenji had stopped counting the days. Time no longer passed in this apartment. There was only before the silence and now. There was no tomorrow. He walked through the rooms like a ghost inside his own life. Lights flickered randomly now, as if forgetting how to glow. His breath fogged the mirror even when the air was warm, and his reflection always smiled a moment too late. But tonight, something different happened. Tonight, the door to apartment 804 was open again. He hadn't approached it since the crawl space, but now the door wasn't just ajar, it was wide open, waiting. No footsteps led in or out. No wind stirred the hall. Just the gaping black mouth of the unit across the corridor. Kenji stood at the threshold. Inside, the apartment looked the same as his own. Same floor plan, same layout, but draped in thick shadows. No furniture, no light. Just walls that shimmered like they were underwater. He stepped through. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, everything changed. The world turned mute. Not just silent, void, like someone had removed the concept of sound from the space. He walked forward slowly. The floor didn't creak. His breath didn't move air. Even his heartbeat faded. It was like walking through a vacuum made of memories. He passed through the bedroom first. The walls here were wrong, stretched tall, warped like wet paper. The ceiling arched upward as though someone had screamed so loud the room had pulled back in fear. He touched the wall. It was soft. It gave beneath his fingers and then slowly pushed back, like skin. In the center of the room was a mirror, not hung, grown into the wall, a perfect oval, polished, clean. And inside it, not a reflection, but a door, a circular opening floating in blackness. Kenji stepped closer. Inside the mirror door was a version of his own apartment, but darker, older, rotting. And in the middle of it sat a woman, not Aiko, hunched, hair covering her face, dressed in a hospital gown yellowed with time. She sat on the floor, tracing circles into the dust. Kenji reached toward the glass. His hand passed through. Not shattered, not resisted, just disappeared into the cold. He followed. Now he was in the mirror room. Not a dream, not a vision, real. He felt the floor under his feet, smelled mildew and rust, saw the peeling walls, the stains on the ceiling. He stepped toward the woman. "Kenji?" he whispered, even though he knew the word would not make sound. She didn't look up. Instead, she spoke, not aloud, but into his head. "You're too late. I made a deal. I gave him what he wanted." Kenji crouched beside her, tried to meet her eyes. "He said I could stay if I stayed quiet, so I stayed." Slowly, she looked up. Her mouth was stitched shut, black threads crossing her lips, tight, clean, not medical, ritual. And behind her eyes was nothing but echo. Kenji backed away. Behind him, the mirror had closed. No exit. The walls of this apartment, this reflection, began to ripple, like water disturbed from below. He screamed, not from his mouth, but from every cell in his body. And the room responded. The walls opened, seams split in the corners, mouths formed in the paint. From every surface came sound, but not human. A great, low hum, the sound of a voice too big to speak in words. It filled his bones. It emptied his lungs. And then from the walls, "She stayed quiet. Now it's your turn." Kenji fell, not down, inward, through the floor, through himself, through soundless, sightless memory. He landed in a chair, the same chair from the crawl space, only now it was upright, clean, waiting. Straps slithered across his arms, tightened. A speaker mounted to the wall clicked on, then hissed, then played his own voice. "Don't forget your name. I'm here. I'm listening. I'm sorry." His voice played again and again and again, until the voice wasn't his own anymore. Just an impression, a mimic, a costume. He understood. This wasn't a haunting. This was a harvesting. The apartment didn't just eat sound. It collected it, stored it, wore it, used it to speak to the next victim. He was being converted into silence, layer by layer, memory by memory, word by word. The walls closed in. The room went dark. And far, far away, in the apartment above, in the real world, a tape recorder clicked, and a new voice whispered, "Can you hear me?" Kenji no longer knew where he was. The room looked like his apartment, but it wasn't. The furniture was correct. The lamp, the table, even the tea stain he remembered making on his first day. But the windows showed nothing now. Not the street, not the sky, only gray static. And the silence wasn't silent anymore. It whispered, not in voices, but in reminders, soft impressions in his bones, ghost sounds flickering like dying stars, the creak of his mother's laugh, the clink of a spoon in childhood, the sound of his name once spoken in love. He could feel them, but never hear them. They pulsed just beneath the skin, trying to escape. He sat on the couch, staring at his hands. They were not shaking, but they were no longer his. The nails had grayed. The skin no longer bore heat. They moved, but they waited, as if listening for orders from something else. On the wall beside him, the paint began to peel. Letters formed beneath the surface, slowly pushing through like teeth from infected gums. How much of you is left? Kenji stared at the question. He whispered nothing in return. He didn't know the answer. That night, the lights flickered once, then dimmed to a sickly yellow. He looked in the mirror for the first time in 3 days, and what he saw was not him. It was a shape made of him. His face, his skin, his bones. But the eyes stared too long. The head tilted half a second behind his movement, and when he opened his mouth to scream, the thing in the mirror smiled instead. In desperation, he returned to the crawl space, the hidden passage where it all began. But when he pulled the tile back, it was gone. No hole, no dust, just seamless wall, like it had never existed, like it had closed behind him, sealing the truth away. He wandered the halls of the building, knocking on other doors. No one answered. He left notes under each one. Do you hear her? Does your silence move too? Have you looked into your mirror lately? The next day, every note was gone, except one, returned to him, slipped under his own door. It read only, "There is no one else here." Kenji began to unravel. He stayed awake through nights that didn't pass. The clock on his wall never ticked past 3:13 a.m. Every time he blinked, it reset. Time stopped respecting him. He found the old cassette recorder again, but this time it wasn't on the table. It was inside the refrigerator, the tape already playing, his voice looping. This is not my apartment. This is not my apartment. This is not. He unplugged the fridge. The tape kept playing. He scrawled messages on the walls. Each one faded after a few hours, painted over by nothing. Even the ink had started to vanish. He whispered to the drain again. Nothing replied. He turned on the faucet. Water ran, but backward, flowing upward into the pipes. He covered the mirror. The wall behind it grew warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. And finally, he saw the door, one he had never seen before. At the end of the hallway, where only blank wall had been, a black door, no handle, just a whisper etched in the center. Enter to forget. He touched it. The door opened into him. He stepped through. Inside was the same apartment and another Kenji. This one asleep, breathing softly, unaware, whole. Kenji reached out, touched the sleeping figure's face. It twitched, then opened its eyes and smiled, but didn't speak, because it had no mouth, just smooth, stretched skin where the lips should be. It whispered anyway, without sound. Thank you. I needed more of you. Kenji stumbled back. The world folded. The room collapsed inward, and then darkness. When he woke, he was lying on the floor of his apartment. Same cracked tiles, same warm air. But now the silence was too perfect. Not even the hum of memory remained. No crying, no mirror messages, no Aiko. Only Kenji, alone, erased. He opened his mouth, tried to scream, tried to remember his name, but there was nothing left to say, because now he was what the silence hid, and someone else was hearing his cries.
The apartment is quiet now, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It's the kind that waits, the kind that breathes when you don't, that listens when you try not to speak. And beneath it all, somewhere in the dark between the walls, she cries. The man who lives in 803 doesn't leave much. He's not seen often. No one hears him. Neighbors, those few still occupying the upper floors, whisper that he was a quiet tenant from the start. Just a man who moved in with too many books and too little noise. The kind of person you forget was ever there, until someone new moves in and asks, "What happened to the man across the hall?" And no one has an answer, because no one ever saw him leave. And yet, the apartment is still occupied. Inside 803, the mirror remains cracked. The faucet sometimes runs backward, and at night, the air grows thick, as if the walls are holding their breath. And at exactly 3:13 a.m., the silence breaks, not with a scream, not with words, but with weeping, a soft, fragile cry, too broken to be performative, too human to be a haunting. The sound echoes, not from the drain, not from the air, but from deep within the walls, from somewhere beyond time and memory. And if you listen closely, you can hear more than one voice. She cries, he cries, and something else listens. Kenji no longer remembers his name. He walks through the rooms slowly now, not like a man in his home, but like a memory inside a museum. Sometimes he touches the wall and feels fingertips pressing back. Other times he speaks, only to hear someone else's voice come from his mouth. A woman's whisper, a child's breath,
a sound he does not recognize, but somehow knows belongs to him now. He has become part of the echo. The silence wears him. His memories dissolve like ink in water. His thoughts loop. He opens the cassette recorder again and again, hoping to hear himself. But the only thing left on the tape is a voice, not his, not hers, just something that has listened to them both for too long. It says, "The only way to be remembered is to be heard. The only way to be kept is to be silent." Kenji understands now. The apartment doesn't just consume sound, it preserves it, like an archive, like a shrine, like a graveyard. Every voice it swallows becomes a thread in the fabric of silence, and every echo it sends forward is an invitation. One night, a knock echoes down the hallway. 3 soft raps. A woman in her early 30s named Naomi arrives with 2 suitcases and a job transfer form. The rent is low, the building is quiet. The landlord's email said 803 was available, furnished, vacant, perfect for someone who likes solitude. She smiles politely at the neighbors. They don't smile back. She unlocks the door, steps inside, closes it behind her. Inside, everything is still. She looks around, unpacks slowly, wipes dust from the edge of the mirror. It's cracked, but only faintly. She makes tea, unrolls a mat, breathes deeply. She speaks aloud. It's so quiet. And for a moment, she thinks she hears her own voice answer. But it's not her. It's a man. Faint, desperate, soft as though from the other side of the wall. Can you hear her cry? She blinks, but there's nothing. Just silence. That night at 3:13 a.m., Naomi sits upright in bed. The room is still, but behind the wall, the crying begins. Soft, fractured, familiar. She listens, and for the first time, the silence listens back.